As we come into Esther chapter 8, we need to do something before we can move forward, and you all know what that is. We need to remember where chapter 7 left us. And then last week, we worked our way through Esther's second banquet. And if you recall Haman's attitude before going into this second banquet that Esther has invited Haman and the king to. Haman was all about himself, just full of pride, knowing that no one else had been invited except for himself and the king. So he goes into this banquet just full of himself. And what takes place at this banquet? Well, it's been leading up to this point because we know it's Haman, the very one who has set the decree to kill all the Jewish people because of Mordecai not willing to bow to Haman and his authority. And we also know by this point, of course, Esther knows that it is Haman who is wanting to not only kill her bloodline, but Esther being Jewish herself, he wants her dead as well. So it's here at this banquet. You have Haman just all kind of proud. And if you even think back to what is sitting in Haman's yard, this massive gallows set up to kill Mordecai. Now, one of the reasons why, of course, Haman is there to begin with is to get the king's permission to go ahead and wipe out Mordecai. But before any of that happens, you see God's providence at work. What does Esther do? At this banquet, here she is, here's the king, here's Haman. And it's here that Esther reveals her Jewish identity. And then she ends up telling the king that she is a Jew and that she is related to Mordecai, who is also a Jew. And in her minds, that should, Mordecai. But Mordecai is the very man that saved the king by revealing the two men in the king's court who were trying to kill him. So when the king hears this, he's like, what is going on? But because it's here that Esther has also revealed that it's the Jewish people that this decree has been sent out to kill all of her bloodline and herself. So the king is furious. Now, let us not forget, they've been drinking for a couple of days now too. So now that anger is starting to boil up with that alcohol that's been consumed. And it's then the king asks Esther, he's like, I want to know the person who has put all of this into play. Who is this person? And she says, a foe and enemy, the wicked Haman. And it's in that moment that Haman has been exposed. Everything about him has just been laid out to the king. So the king, in all of his fury, he can't even sit in the same room with Haman. He walks out into the palace courtyard, and he's just fuming at this point. But also by way of God's decree, we have Haman still in the banquet with the queen, and he understands now that everything that has been given to him, everything that he loves and adores about himself is being stripped away. So what does Haman do? He begins to beg for his life to this Jewish queen. But we also see in God's sovereignty what happens. So the king, in all of his fury, he can't get it all out in the courtyard, so he walks back in to where the queen and Haman are. And as he walks back in, what does he see? Somehow, the moment before, not somehow, by God's hand, I just want to see if you are paying attention. But before the king walks in, back into that room, Haman trips. Haman trips and falls upon the queen. And so what is it that the king sees when he walks back into the room? He believes that the queen is being attacked by this man. So with all the information that's been given to him, and now him witnessing, or what he believes he's witnessing, the queen being attacked, the king's like, that's it. He's going to die. So they cover Haman's face. Why? Because he's going to be executed. And in the room, at that moment, one of the eunuchs speaks up. Hey, king, I know how we can kill him. You're not going to believe this, but Haman has built this massive gallows in his yard to kill Mordecai. So why don't we just kill him on that? King's like, that's a great idea. And that's exactly what they do. They take Haman and they kill him by the very device in which he had built for Mordecai to be killed. So you're seeing this beautiful reversal of the very man who is wanting to destroy God's people being just eliminated by that very tool. And by the time chapter 7 ends, we're told the wrath of the king is abated. Haman is gone. The enemy behind the decree to kill God's people has been taken out. But here's the issue, O church. Even though he's gone, the problem is not fully resolved. And the wonderful question is, well, why not? Well, what is it that we have been taught in the book of Esther? That this decree that the king has put forth cannot be removed. So this decree against the Jews is still active throughout the Persian Empire. So here we have chapter 8, and it begins with Haman swaying from the gallows. Mordecai has been vindicated, and Esther still needs to plea for the lives of her people. So let's jump into this because we have a whole chapter to cover here. So look at verse 1. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. So Haman hasn't been dead very long at all. But what does the king do? This very man who is wanting to destroy y'all, everything that he has, I'm turning over to you, O queen. And notice, it still calls him the enemy of the Jews. And why does it say that? Well, because even after his death, the text reminds us that his opposition was not merely just against Mordecai. He despised the Jewish people, hated the Jewish people. And now everything that once belonged to him now belongs to a Jew. Here the king gives Esther Haman's estate directly. And I hope we recognize this because Haman was so consumed with this world, with the power that comes in this world. And his pride, because of that power that has been given to him, was all that mattered to him. It was all about self. But all of that collapses under God's judgment. Now, the verse continues. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. Now, remember, she's been quiet about Mordecai this whole time. And now she reveals, you know, the king's jaw has to drop. As in, wait a minute. So first, Esther, let me get this right. You're Jewish. But of all people who raised you, is the very man that saved my life? No such thing as a coincidence, right? I mean, the king would have been blown away by this information. But now everything has been revealed. The very man who once sat outside the king's gate because he couldn't enter. And the reason why he sat outside the king's gate was to keep an ear out for what was taking place with Esther. But man, now this man is able to enter into the king's palace. And look at verse 2. So here you have Mordecai the Jew. Look at what it says. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman. So Haman, before he was taken to the gallows, at some point, the ring was removed from his hand. So before Haman's death, he's seeing all this power being stripped from him. Everything that the world had to offer was being taken away from him, and there was nothing else for him to look forward to. That was it. But that ring now is on Mordecai's finger. And what does this ring represent? It represents royal authority. Now, again, this is the very ring that Haman used to decree the destruction of the Jewish people. And now, Mordecai has it. The very position Haman abused is now entrusted to the very man that Haman hated. And the verse closes by saying this, and Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Wait, okay. So what we saw originally, the king looks at Esther and is like, I'm going to give everything he has to you. It's yours. And then what does Esther do? She looks at Mordecai and says, hey, everything that Haman once owned is now yours. Even this authority that comes with this signet ring. This should be made into a movie. It has, but I mean, we could do an updated one, right? I mean, there's so much taking place. So Mordecai is not only spared from death, which is now just months away. He's elevated into the authority over the estate of the man who planned to execute him. You see God preserving his people every step of the way. Now, we're going to look at verses 3 through 5, and the focus is going to shift from Haman's downfall to the unresolved danger that is still hanging over the Jewish people. That danger is still there. That date is still set for the Jewish people to be wiped out, to be annihilated, to be plundered. And why is it still there? Well, it's from the king. It cannot be overthrown. So look at verse 3. Then Esther spoke again to the king. You're going to see a very humble queen who has just been given this estate. But look at what she does. She fell at his feet and wept and pleaded with him to avert the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. I mean, she's crushed knowing what is still going to happen to her people. So she's asking the king, is there just something you can do to stop this from happening? Can we pause just for a moment? Not very long, because we don't want to get out of here too late. But moving forward, there's one thought that I want you to keep tucked in there, okay, if you will. Remember Mordecai and what has just happened. He's been given the ring, and he's been given the estate of Haman, a very powerful man in the king's court. Now, I want you to think about that, because that is going to spread throughout the kingdom what's been given to Mordecai. That's extremely important moving forward, because I think it's going to help answer a question that you may have later on. If not, well, at least it helped me answer the question that I had, okay? And we keep seeing Haman, he's being referred to as the Agagite, and this is reminding the reader That this conflict isn't just about personal hatred, it is a conflict against God's people. So this takes us all the way back to the Amalekites, right? That's where we are here. He was an Amalekite, despised the people of God. In verse 4, here the queen is, she's crushed, she's wrecked, she's pleading for her people. And verse 4 says, when the king held out the golden scepter to Esther, Esther rose and stood before the king. So we're seeing this in the first time that he's reached this golden scepter out. Earlier in the book, the scepter meant what? That Esther's life would be spared because she went to him without being called. So, second time, scepter is before her. And it's here that she is going to, once again, plead for the preservation of her people. So she stands before the king. This language is showing us, this text is showing us not only the humility that the queen is showing, but there is some boldness here. And listen, this boldness isn't displaying her power. That's not what this boldness is about. It's about the love that she has for God's people, and she's willing to throw anything out there, including her life. So she approaches him reverently, and again speaking courageously. In verse 5, it says, and she said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if the thing seems right before the king, that's a weird way to say it, but we're just going to go with it. And I am pleasing in his eyes, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the Agagite and the son of Hammedatha, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are all in the provinces of the king. So she's begging once again, please revoke this. But there's something that she doesn't do. Notice she doesn't accuse the king. She's not angry at the king. She doesn't look at the king and say, well, listen here, stupid. If you would have just asked Haman who he was going after, all of this could have been avoided. But you didn't, because you were drunk on the power that he was giving you and he was building you up and you just fell into it. That she doesn't say any of that. She doesn't. There's this humility pouring from her. So now the question is, what's the king going to do? Is he going to step in and intervene this from happening? But the decree of death still stands. Look at verse 6. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming to my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred? So her words they're deeply personal at this point. You can picture her tears streaming down her face. Her voice is cracking as she is speaking, maybe even sobbing at this point before the king. I want you to notice something else. The repetition. How can I bear? How can I live with this? Knowing that in the months coming up, my people are going to be eliminated. She's not even saying me. She's not saying I'm going to be killed. She keeps talking about her people. Then verse 7. Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he intended to lay hands on the Jews. Okay, that's great, King. You eliminated the man who set the decree forward. Thank you for doing that, right? From the king's perspective, he's like saying, well, I've done quite a bit. I killed the man who came up with this idea. But again, the problem still remains. So there may be a moment in which the king is processing everything that's being said. And then we see verse 8 with the king. But you may write as you please with regard to the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. This is the same issue that we have with the first decree by Haman, right? This cannot be revoked, so death is still coming for the Jews. But this is also a very critical moment in the chapter. Because the king does not cancel the original decree. He can't. Instead, he tells Esther and Mordecai, I want you to come up with a decree that challenges the original. And Mordecai, you possess the ring. So whatever you all come up with, you have my full support. You take the ring, use it as the signet, and that's going to be the decree that is going all throughout the land. Every province. Again, we're seeing the providence of God continuing to work. And remember what I told you to keep tucked away? We're going to be coming to that in a few moments, okay? But first, verses 9 through 12. So now we're going to see the focus shift yet again, okay? So we're going to see a focus now shifting from Esther's pleading to the issuing of a new decree throughout the empire to what are we going to see now? The king grants this authority to move forward. And notice there's no hesitation. Why? Because every day that goes by is coming closer to that day in which the people are going to be allowed to annihilate the Jewish people. Which is why in verse 9 it says, the king's scribes were summoned at that time in the third month, so we're like 9 months away, right? Which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and an edict was written according to all that Mordecai commanded concerning the Jews to the satraps and to the governors and the officials of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to each province in its own script and to each people in its own language, and also to the Jews in their script and their language. Okay, so no hesitation, right? We're going to put this out. This is what we got from Esther and Mordecai. Notice what they do. Every single language throughout the kingdom that someone speaks, it is written in that language. It is covering all people. All people are going to understand what this decree is going to say. So he gets all the king's scribes together because we don't have any time to waste. And look at verse 10. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's signet ring. Then he sent the letters by mounted couriers riding on swift horses that were used in the king's service, bred from the royal stud. Now you may be thinking, well, that ends kind of weird. Bred from the royal stud? Why is that thrown in there? You think about the best horse that the king owns. And here you have the offspring of that stud of a horse. These are the horses that were chosen. So we're seeing, even by way of the king, he's not wasting any time. It is the best of the best making their way out. No time to waste. See, even God's hand was in that horse. That stud was placed there for that specific moment in time. Not a single thing is out of the control of God, which is pretty impressive when you really think about everything that has come together. So the letters were sent rapidly by the mounted carriers, these swift royal horses. And you can only imagine as the horses were running throughout the kingdom, it's like, man, this must be pretty important news because we don't always see these horses. These horses are set aside for special occasions. So not only when the horses make their way throughout the kingdom, people are going to start talking, hey, what's the big deal? What's going on here? So the word is going to, no pun intended, travel fast. Look at verse 11. Saying that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather and defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate any armed force of any people or province that might attack them, children and women included, and to plunder their goods. Okay, let that sit for a moment. Because then verse 12 says, on one day, throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Remember, this is the date that Haman has set where all the Jewish people were going to be annihilated. And it's not just the armed forces. It was anyone who wanted to kill a Jew and take whatever they wanted. That was the plan for that one day by Haman. So now the king has sent out this decree. O Jews, here's what I want you to do. If anyone tries to attack you, you have every right to kill that person. Not only that person, but their wife and children as well. Okay. That little bit of information I told you to tuck away earlier, right? But because my thought is this. Well, you know the Jewish people are outnumbered in this land. And if you have them outnumbered by the pagans, and then you have even an army that can also attack the Jewish people, just by way of you sending out a decree and saying, you guys can fight back. It's all good. But yet at the same time, the Gentiles and the army that may attack, they're still able to take everything from the Jewish people. What's going to stop them from still doing it? Okay, now this is what's very important, and we're seeing God at work. What did God do before this decree ever went out? He took Mordecai, the Jew, and gave him Haman's estate. Not only did God give Mordecai Haman's estate, he also gave Mordecai the signet ring, which is what? Royal authority. So now the mindset is, wait, listen, we may have the majority of people on our side and even maybe some of the armed forces, but Mordecai has the king on his side. What's this going to look like for us if we do move forward with this attack on this powerful man? Do you see how God has set this up? I can't have the king overthrow his decree, but I can give Mordecai the power that would terrify the people in this kingdom. I was impressed by that. So in a sense, yes, that danger is still coming, but now the people have to think twice. Do I really want to go through with this? But not only that, even the pagans are recognizing the power of the true living God. They're not idiots. They're sitting here thinking, how did this take place? Haman issued this decree to kill all the Jewish people. Then Mordecai, the Jew, gets invited in, and the queen is also a Jew. They get invited into this second banquet. The banquet ends, and then you have Haman swaying back and forth from the gallows that he built for Mordecai. But now Mordecai has his estate, has the ring. We probably shouldn't do this. It's beautiful. The Jews are no longer defenseless in this pagan land. Now look at verse 13. So a copy of what was written was to be issued as a decree in every province, being publicly displayed to all peoples, and the Jews were to be ready on that day to take vengeance on their enemies. Mine's weird, and I have these images that pop in my head. Some of them are good, sometimes not. But anyway, I just had this moment where it popped in where you could picture the Jewish people like at 11:59, and as soon as the clock strikes 12, and then that day has been issued for them to be killed, I just picture them all sitting outside on their front porch with a shotgun. I know they didn't have shotguns back then, but that's the image that popped in my head first. They're just waiting. It's like, yeah, what are you going to do? Shotguns ready, ARs ready. Probably stole a couple of grenades from somewhere, but yeah, what are you going to do? Yeah, the Jews were ready. Verse 14 says, so the couriers mounted on their swift horses that were used in the king's service rode out hurriedly, urged by the king's command. The decree was issued in Susa, the citadel. So we go to the city, and it starts there and begins to spread. Now, Mordecai's decree is being publicly proclaimed everywhere. There's not a single solitary place in that kingdom that hasn't heard of Mordecai and Esther's decree. And then check this out, because this goes into the whole, maybe we shouldn't mess with the Jewish people. Look at how this ends. Look at how this ends. Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king. So the people are going to be watching. Wait a minute, Mordecai's been blessed to come into the king's palace. Now, not everyone's blessed. If you show up uninvited, you get killed. That's a possibility. But now we're seeing Mordecai walk out, the very guy that's been hanging out the gate. He's walking out. But he doesn't just walk out. Went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown, and a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. Oh, that's our boy. Yeah, this is good for us. They're excited. They're stoked about this. Of course, the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict reached, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many from the peoples of the country declared them. This is funny. Okay, get this, okay? And many from the peoples of the country declared themselves Jews. You had people who weren't even Jews. They're going around like, well, I'm Jewish now. I'm Jewish now. I'm part of that group, right? They're looking at their Jewish neighbors. I'm one of you. We're good. I'm not going to attack if you don't attack, so we're all good. For fear of the Jews had fallen on them. That's such a wonderful story. And it's sad that more churches don't work their way through this. Some of you may be thinking, well, they could do it quicker than you. But anyway, we're coming to a close, but because this contrast is striking. Because earlier in the book, what did we see earlier? Mordecai. He sat in sackcloth and ashes, mourning over the decree of the destruction of him and his people. And now he's leaving the king's presence, clothed in these royal garments of blue and white. I mean, you're going to notice this guy walking down the street. He's going to stand out. Plus, he's got this big, fat, golden crown on his head. Man, the man who was once marked for death, that Haman just despised, is now being publicly honored in the kingdom. So, Haman, the enemy, has fallen. Preservation of God's people is going out. And Mordecai's been elevated to this authority. And we see here in the city, Susa shouted and rejoiced. We see even in verse 17 that throughout the provinces, many people declared what? themselves to be Jews because they don't want to be killed by the Jewish people, right? That's what they're declaring. And ultimately, this chapter is showing us something else. This chapter is pointing beyond itself to a greater deliverance that is found in Christ. Because what do we see throughout Esther? That the people of God lived under this shadow of a decree of death. But through God's providence, a way of deliverance has been provided. And what once was mourning has now been turned into rejoicing. And this points us far beyond the book of Esther, all the way into the gospel. Because what are we told? Scripture says that apart from Christ, we stand under the sentence of sin and death. But through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, God has provided deliverance for His people. In Christ, condemnation is removed, enemies are defeated, and sorrow is turned into joy. So I pray that we see throughout Esther 8, this reminds us that God does not abandon His people under the shadow of judgment. He provides a means of salvation. And this temporary deliverance that we see in Persia is ultimately pointing us to the greater and eternal deliverance accomplished through Christ. All right.